हेलो हेलो।
अब मैं दिया मैसेज उनको आओ बोल के क्या है कि आते हो।
उसको जोशी देखो
आओ हाँ।
अच्छा दिए क्या?
अरे भाई अब गायत्री फोन आना कि भाई अब आप तो बढ़ता 150 मेरे हिसाब से तो 150 आना।
एक ही लगा पूरे लगाना था साहब।
आओ लगा।
फिर जावेद का तो निकाल रहे हैं।
अरे तुम लगा दिए होंगे समझा ये बात मैं देखा
हाल तो बात
वो
हाल दे रहा है।
है।
ये लगा तो बैठे ना
बड़े साहब नहीं आए। अब भाई तो बड़े साहब अपने बड़े साहब हमारे बड़े साहब बनारस में शुरू होंगी। ये बैठक जो हमारे रघु कुमार जी किताब लिखे हैं रिविजिटिंग राममनोहर लोहिया, उसको रिलीज करने के लिए मीटिंग आयोजित की गई है। इसके लिए हमारे मुख्य अतिथि श्री रामचंद्र गुहा जी नोटेड हिस्टोरियन जी वो आए हुए हैं। मैं इनसे रिक्वेस्ट करता हूं कि वो स्टेज पे आए। रघु कुमार जी हमारे आज के सभा के अध्यक्ष श्री रमाशंकर सिंह जी, फॉर्मर मिनिस्टर ऑफ मध्य प्रदेश एंड फाउंडर चांसलर ऑफ ITM यूनिवर्सिटी ग्वालियर, उनसे भी रिक्वेस्ट करता हूं कि वो भी स्टेज पे आए। हमारे आज के जो अध्यक्ष रमाशंकर जी हैं वो 1952 23 दिसंबर को उनका जन्म मध्य प्रदेश में हुआ, भिंड जिले में। वो 3 बार वहाँ से MLA बने। वो सबसे पहले समाजवादी युवजन सभा में थे, हमारे साथ मैं भी था। 1971-72 में हम लोग सम्मेलनों में मिलते थे। समाजवादी युवजन सभा, बाद में फिर युवा जनता हुआ, जनता पार्टी बनी, उसमें भी हम लोग साथ में थे। बाद में फिर वो मध्य प्रदेश से चुनाव लड़े और 77 में 80 में 81 में 3 बार MLA बने और मध्य प्रदेश में मिनिस्टर भी रहे। लेकिन जैसा कि आपको मालूम है, समाजवादियों को मिनिस्टरशिप बाता नहीं, वो उसके कटघरे में रहना उनका आदत नहीं है, तो वो छोड़ के बाहर आ गए। और फिर जब से वो शिक्षा के एजुकेशन लाइन में है, डिफरेंट कॉलेजेस इस्टेब्लिश किए। बाद में फिर एक यूनिवर्सिटी ITM यूनिवर्सिटी इस्टेब्लिश किए ग्वालियर में, और उसे और एक यूनिवर्सिटी वडोदरा में भी इस्टेब्लिश किए। और अभी पिछले 4-5 साल से वो राममनोहर लोहिया की जितने पुस्तकें पहले बद्री विशाल कीर्ति जी हैदराबाद में पब्लिश करते थे, अब उनका देहांत होने के बाद कुछ दिन के लिए वो काम नहीं चला, तो रमाशंकर जी ग्वालियर से, दिल्ली से वो पुस्तकें रिपब्लिश करके फिर उसको पब्लिक में ला रहे हैं। तो बद्री विशाल जी का जो छुटा हुआ काम था वो हमारे रमाशंकर जी कर रहे हैं। हमें बहुत खुशी है कि ये काम आगे चलते रहेगा। और राममनोहर लोहिया समता न्यास के बारे में आपको बता दूं, मैं ये बद्री विशाल कीर्ति जी ने इस्टेब्लिश किया था 1974-75 में, जब से ये चल रहा है। और जितना सोशलिस्ट लिटरेचर है वो पूरा इसी न्यास से पब्लिश हुआ, बद्री विशाल जी की मेहनत की वजह से, उनकी लगन की वजह से। जहाँ भी डॉक्टर लोहिया जाते थे मीटिंगों में, तो बद्री विशाल जी टेप रिकॉर्डर लेके वहाँ चले जाते थे और उस मीटिंग को रिकॉर्ड करके फिर उसको लाके उसको फिर टाइपिंग करवा के हार्ड कॉपी बनवा के उसको पब्लिश करते थे। जैसा उनको आजकल के समाजवादी उनको भगीरथ जी का उपाधि देते हैं, जैसा भगीरथ जी हिमालय से गंगा को लेके लाए जनता की भलाई के लिए, उसी तरह डॉक्टर लोहिया के विचारों को समाजवादियों तक, समाजवादी कार्यकर्ताओं तक लाने का काम बद्री विशाल जी ने किया। मैं माफी चाहता हूँ, हमारे और एक गेस्ट रामचंद्र मूर्ति जी आए हैं, उनसे मैं रिक्वेस्ट करता हूँ कि वो स्टेज पे आए। सॉरी सर, सॉरी। अभी मैं श्री रघु कुमार जी से निवेदन करता हूं कि वो कृपया आए और रामचंद्र गुहा जी का परिचय दे और एक पुस्तक के बारे में भी, उसका बैकग्राउंड है उसके बारे में भी वो बताए। श्री रघु कुमार जी।
of this function, Rama Shankar ji,
the chief guest of today's function, Ramchand Guhaji, senior editor, a well-known personality in Telugu circles, Sri K. Ramachandran Murthy garu, Gopal Singh Thakurji, secretary of the Lohia Vichar, Hyderabad. I just introduced the chief guest of today's function. Ramchand Guhaji is a well-known public intellectual, historian, and a distinguished professor of Priya University, CCT, AP. And he is well-known columnist also. He has been contributing and offering critique to the present form of the Hindutva. And he has also been very vocal in his expression. He has written voluminous literature, especially on Indian political history post-independence. And yesterday, when we heard him in Manthar, I was only reading his books, Gandhi before India, Gandhi after India, and so many books. But I could learn only very little about his struggles to bring forth the political history of modern India, because history itself is considered as something which is in the distant past, which always disturbs the minds of all the people. But yesterday, Guhaji gave a new interpretation to the idea of history, that current history is also history, which needs to be investigated, which needs to be presented before the people. Otherwise, there is something like after reflections after several years, there is a possibility of leading or misleading it incorrectly. So we are very much thankful to even for his presence, kind presence in this function, because I am not a well-known writer like Guhaji, but he was kind enough to accept our invitation, especially Somayaji, Ravela Somaya Garu. ఈ మొత్తం యాక్టివిటీ వెనక ఉన్న మనిషి అంటే 2015-16 నేను జస్ట్ స్విచింగ్ ఓవర్ టు తెలుగు సమ్ టైమ్ బికాస్ ఆఫ్ బీయింగ్ ఏ లోహియన్ ఆల్సో. 2015లో ఒకసారి అనుకోకుండా కలిసినప్పుడు సోమయ్య గారిని ఏం చదువుతున్నావు నువ్వు అంటే నేను గాంధీని చదువుతున్నాను సార్. ఎందుకంటే 2013-14 onwards the entire information in the social media was undergoing a tremendous change. Gandhi was being projected something else which was not known to us. అసలు ఇంత ముందు తెలియదు ఈ గాంధీ మనకి. ఇప్పుడు సోషల్ మీడియాలో వస్తున్న గాంధీ is a different Gandhi. So I was shocked to know, because I have in my own life I have two experiences. One is my father was an RSS man, a teacher, government teacher, but he was having a lot of respect to Gandhi. This was the contradiction which I could not reflect at that time, but later on when I was writing my book on Gandhi, I tried to reconcile all the things. Then simultaneously, I have been reading Lohia for more than 30 years. Since somewhere around 1990 onwards, I have been reading Lohia. So this was the occasion where Ravela Somayaji encouraged me to start writing on Gandhi and also on Lohia. So these things took a shape somewhere in first book took a shape in 2020 as a book Gandhi, A Hope in Despair, which was published by Writers Grand Delhi. But this book, particular book, Lohia, revisiting Lohia, challenges before the alternative socialism. This is a concept which I wanted to revisit because the first question which has been haunting my mind for a long time, నన్ను చాలా కాలం నుంచి బాధపెడుతున్న విషయం ఏంటంటే, ఒకవేళ నిజంగా మెయిన్ స్ట్రీమ్ మార్క్సిస్ట్ సోషలిస్ట్ వెర్షన్ కనుక అది తగినంత ఇన్స్పిరేషన్ ఇవ్వట్లేదు, సోషల్ చేంజ్ని కాజ్ చేయట్లేదు అంటే వాట్ నెక్స్ట్? అసలు ఆల్టర్నేటివ్ సోషలిజం ఉందా లేదా? పెద్ద క్వశ్చన్ ఏంటంటే, ఇంటర్నేషనల్లీ సోషలిస్ట్ ఆల్మోస్ట్ ఆల్ మార్క్సిస్ట్ ఇంటలెక్చువల్స్ they just condemn the very idea of alternative socialism. They say that even today also morning when somebody saw in the Facebook about my book, one Marxist from Bangalore, he just banned me on the Facebook itself, saying that it's a trash to call something as alternative socialism. There is no other socialism than what is the Marxian type of socialism. This is how, and in fact, this was the issue which was haunting me for a long time. And two interventions also compelled me to go into this study. The first intervention is, I just read out that particular part of my immediate instigation. That is Makoto Ito, a professor of economics, Japan. He wrote recently one great book called as The Basic Theory of Capitalism, The Forms and Substance of Capitalist Economy. In the introductory part of the book, he made one wonderful statement. That is something, it reads like this: in spite of the actual deep crisis in the capitalist economy, in spite of the actual deep crisis in the capitalist economy, as well as in bourgeois social thought, the socialist movement is not gaining. There is a crisis in the capitalist economy, it's true. But as a result of it, the idea of socialism should have taken deep roots in the society, but it is not taking place. This was the issue. And he says that, but rather suffering with the weakening of social position of the workers. As the days goes on, capitalism is in crisis, but at the same time socialism is not gaining, and workforce is going into a kind of deprivation continuously. Then moreover, added to it, there have been problematic situations in existing socialist countries, including international conflicts, even wars and military invasions among them. The process of the Cultural Revolution in China, the weak position of workers expressed in the Polish Solidarity movement, and the role of orthodox Marxian theories, which tend uncritically to legitimize the status quo in those countries, are some of the issues. The gap between the ideal and the reality of socialism generally seems great. Socialism, including Marxism, as an alternative to capitalism, are thus also in crisis. It is not only capitalism that is in crisis, even socialism is also in crisis. This element was not present in the preceding historical crisis during the Great Depression in the late 19th century and the 1930s. We have to recognize that human history as a whole, across the West and in the East, as well as in the North and the South, is on serious trial. This is Makoto Ito, the German economist, said. Similarly, during the early phases of the lockdown during the 2020 pandemic, one of the greatest Marxist scholar, Prabhat Patnaik, was talking on a June session. And he said, now it is the highest crisis capitalism has reached. And with this, capitalism will come to an end. And now it is the future is only for socialism. This was something like a naive opinion coming from the best of the best intellectual minds. So this was the provocation where I was studying Lohia for a long time. I thought of understanding and restating what exactly Lohia wanted to say or mean in the name of alternative socialism. And then I have designed this book in 4 important chapters, that is intellectual and political biography. I have touched only intellectual biography. I have not gone into intellectual and political biography. I have not gone into many other areas of Lohian life. Then, what was the critique offered by Lohia on capitalism, communism and Gandhiism also? Because it's not that Lohia took on only capitalism and then restricted himself to the critique of Marx. He went on even to the extent of critiquing Gandhian philosophies. Then, as an alternative, what else is the question? Then, one of the basic foundations in the Marxian theory of social changes is the changes take place according to the material conditions of production. And then the struggle between the production forces for the control over the production forces, control over the production forces. So now what happens is, this is what Marx has briefly said as the entire history of the world is the history of class studies. This is where Lohia differs. And Lohia finds that this area of understanding has come in the Marxist tradition because they were seeing only the progressive Europe. They were only seeing the progressive Europe. They have the experience of the progressive Europe. And the Asiatic countries have cycles of such growth and fall. So what is that growth and fall? Which causes that growth and fall? And how to understand this struggle, that what's called the history of the world is the history of the class struggles has to be restated. And then he restated as history of the world is the history of the oscillations between class and caste. This is one of the most wonderful political economy reorientation given by Lohia, and that is the wheel of history. And in the wheel of history, he takes on the major narratives of history, both the cyclical view of history, which was prevalent both in the Asiatic societies, what's called as archaic societies like other societies, and even the most modern American and the British historians like Spengler, Toynbee. All these people were talking about the cyclic movement. And the Marxists and the European scholars by that time were arriving at something called as linear progress of history. So Lohia critiqued both the sides. He offered critique of the linear progress of history. He also said the cyclic view of history also is not so absolutely total. So after examining these areas, and then the basic issue is how the surplus value has been created in the European societies. Is it an internal dialectics? That is the contradiction between the capitalist and the working class, which Marx has seen as an internal mechanism happening between the capitalist and the workers, exploitation of the workers resulting in the what's called as surplus with the capitalist. But Lohia said that that is not the area in which the surplus has come to the European societies, because the defect has come because Marx has considered the entire history before the formation of the bourgeois societies, before the formation of the capitalist societies as prehistory. He just discarded it as prehistory. So when he discards it prehistory, the entire how the capitalism has developed in the Europe is totally ignored. And then surplus value theory has been understood as an internal mechanism of the exploitation of the capitalism of the workers. So this Lohia says it is incorrect. And another theory which has become very famous in the Marxist circles was Lenin's theory, that is what is called as the imperialism is the highest stage of the capitalism, which Lohia said it is not so. Both imperialism and capitalism have grown simultaneously. They are twins, and you cannot separate them. Once you separate them, the idea of your value and surplus value goes into a wrong direction. These are all the basic foundations, and then there are so many other areas like theory of immediacy, theory of equidistance, theory of equal irrelevancy, and so many other areas, and then Saptakranti, how to resolve all these issues. Because the world has been viewed by the Marxist historians and the European historians as the history of dialectical movement, that is contradictions. Then Lohia says that these are not contradictions. But the very idea of foundation that it comes out of a contradiction may not be correct. So this is the starting point. Then he found that equality cannot be achieved only in terms of economic conditions. So equality has to be achieved at the 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 layers, which he calls as Saptakranti, 7 revolutions. So these are all the theoretical foundations on which Lohia developed an alternative theory of socialism. By writing this book, I have ultimately in the last chapter where I have examined the entire thing, I offered something called a Lohia, a critique and a restatement. It is not that I have just praised Lohia and kept quiet. I also found, because Lohia has examined the economics of Marx, but socialists have not examined, the Lohian socialists have not seriously examined the economics after Lohia. The economics after Marx was examined by Lohia. But what happens if you don't, if you fail to examine the economics after Lohia? So 1960s onwards, the whole world is undergoing a tremendous change. The Duncan's proposals resulting in the WTO, and then the what's called as the capitalism repeatedly coming out of its own crisis. And while as the Japanese economist has said, both capitalism and socialism are also under crisis. So these are all also need to be examined before the Lohian theories of alternative socialism can be understood, explained and furthered. This is the basic idea of the book, and with this scheme of the things I wrote this book. I just introduced the book to you. Thank you very much. Thank you for giving this opportunity. Garu is a well-known man in the Telugu speaking circles. He was the chief editor of the HMTV for a long time. He was also the chief editor of Hansa, a famous English newspaper, daily newspaper. And more than that, he was famous for his interventions from 2001 onwards, when the Telangana struggle was going. He conducted series of talks among all sections of the people, open debates in the name of Dasha Disha. I think that has virtually captured the eye of all the intellectuals in Telugu speaking areas. It was so great thing, so great intervention. No TV channel could do it, and the debates were held in such a wonderful way, in a very democratic way, under the guidance of K. Ramachandramurthy. So I thank very much for his kind presence here. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
साथियों, अभी हमारे अतिथियों का इंट्रोडक्शन हुआ। अब इसके बाद अतिथियों का स्वागत होगा। मैं श्री शंकरलाल यादव जी से निवेदन करता हूं कि रामचंद्र गोवा जी को पुष्पगुच्छ देकर सम्मान करें। श्री ए नारायण जी, रमाशंकर सिंह जी को पुष्पगुच्छ देकर सम्मान करें। श्री अरुंधति गारू रामचंद्रमूर्ति गारी की पुष्प बुके इच्छे सम्मान से। श्री नरेश सिंह जी रघु कुमार जी को बुके देके सम्मान करेंगे। नरेश सिंह। सुनीता नायडू जो यहाँ पर स्टेज पे बचा हुआ एक ही आदमी है उसका स्वागत।
नाम जानते हैं?
We have to introduce even Gopal Singh Thakur sir, because nobody introduces what is this. But somebody may introduce even Gopal Singh. No, there are so many new people, sir. Please.
అందరికీ నమస్తే. ఆల్ ఇండియాలో అంటే యాక్చువల్లీ నేను సోషల్గా వర్క్ చేస్తున్నప్పటి నుంచి కూడా ఎంకరేజింగ్ పర్సన్ గోపాల్ సార్. హ్యూమన్ రైట్స్లో ప్రతి ఇష్యూ పైన తను రియల్గా ధర్మం ఎక్కడుంది అని ఆలోచించి మాకు హెల్ప్ చేసిన మహోన్నతమైన వ్యక్తి గోపాల్ సింగ్ సార్. అంతకన్నా ఎక్కువ శబ్దాలు లేవు. ఇప్పుడు నేను ఇక్కడ నిలబడ్డానికి కారణం కూడా ఆయనే. ఎందుకంటే నేను ఒక లీడర్ అవ్వాలని ఎంతైతే తాపత్రయపడితే ఈ సొసైటీలో ఈ జనరేషన్లో ఎట్లా వెళ్తుంది అధర్మం అనేది ఆయనకు తెలుసు బాగా. సో నన్ను ఎంకరేజ్ చేసి ప్రతి విషయంలో ముందుకు పంపిస్తున్నారు. అంటే లేడీస్కి ఎక్కువ ఎంకరేజ్మెంట్ ఇస్తానని మాట్లాడే లీడర్స్ కాదు, అలాంటి మహోన్నతమైన పిల్లర్స్ దేయాలి. అంటే ఇక్కడ స్టేజ్ పైన ఉన్న వాళ్ళంతా కూడా సమాజానికి పిల్లర్స్. అంతే, వాళ్ళు ఏం కోరుకోలేదు, వాళ్ళు జస్ట్ దశాదిశ కార్యక్రమంలో రామచంద్ర గారు కూడా ఎన్నోసార్లు మాకు అవకాశం ఇచ్చారు మాట్లాడడానికి. ఇక్కడున్న కూర్చున్న వాళ్ళందరికీ కూడా నా నమస్కారాంజలు. అరుంధతి, ఆల్ ఇండియా నుంచి మీకు ఒక అంటే భారత్ మాత లాగా అందరికీ బ్లెస్సింగ్స్ అడగచ్చుకున్నాను.
डॉक्टर रामनव लोहिया और बद्री विशाल पीटी जी के फोटो पे पुष्पमाला चढ़ाकर दीप प्रज्वलित कर इस सभा का शुभारंभ करें।
हनी हनी
डॉक्टर लोहिया अमर है विशाल पित्ती, बद्री विशाल पित्ती। अब मैं अध्यक्ष जी से निवेदन करता हूं कि वो सभा का संचालन कार्यक्रम अनुसार
मेरी तरफ से आप करेंगे ना।
Here for the launching of the book revisiting Dr. Ram Manohar Lohia. So first we will ask our chief guest to release the book. So after that on the book other our dignitaries also will speak and all the members also can see. Now I request all the guests to release the book.
కొంచెం
సార్ వచ్చేస్తున్నారు సార్ కొంచెం ఇటు రండి సార్ సార్ ఇక్కడ వేరే పెద్ద కెమెరాకి ఇబ్బంది అవుతుంది సార్ పెద్ద కెమెరాకి ఇబ్బంది అవుతుంది.
Thank you, Shri Gopal Singh Ji. Thank you, everyone. I'm going to begin with some remarks on Dr. Lohia and Shri Ram Kumar Ji's book, and congratulations on your achievement. And then I'm going to end with some reflections on the history of Indian socialism more generally. So I'll start with Dr. Lohia and the book that Shri Ram Kumar has written on his thought, and then I'll talk about Indian socialism more generally. The book combines both life and thought. That's its strength. That we hear about Lohia's personal journey, his extraordinary personal journey from UP via Kolkata to Banaras and of course Berlin and many other places on after his return, and of his ideas. And I'll say a little bit about the ideas. I think Raghu Kumar is absolutely right that there is an alternative socialism. In fact, if you look at 19th century Europe, there were many varieties of socialism contending. In 19th century Europe, in Latin America, some of the echoes of the debates on socialism reached India. Vivekananda called himself a socialist. Hardayal wrote a book in the early 20th century called Karl Marx, a Modern Rishi. So there were, as industrialization proceeded in Europe, and the division between workers and capitalists grew, and as Raghu Kumar Ji said, as European imperialism made its impact felt in many different parts of the world, there was active debate on an alternative political order. And there was no one kind of socialism. There were many kinds of socialism. There was Marxist socialism, there was agrarian socialism, there was anarchism, there was syndicalism. And what happened was that in 1917, one form of socialism won through Lenin and the Bolshevik Revolution, and after that, systematically, the winning brand of socialism disparaged, diminished, decertified every other kind of socialism. So I'm not surprised by the Marxists from Bangalore who commented on Facebook, who thinks just as the RSS thinks there is only one kind of Hinduism, the Marxists think there is only one kind of socialism. Right. Actually, I said if you look at 19th and early 20th century Europe, there were many different kinds of socialism contending, but this political victory of the Bolshevik Revolution kind of sent every other kind of socialism underground. So I'm glad that we are debating Lohia and socialism. And the book, as I said, combines life and thought. We hear of Dr. Lohia's personal journey as well as his political and intellectual journey. And Lohia was an extraordinarily courageous individual. He had to flee Berlin because of the Nazis on the advice of his teacher, as Raghu Kumar tells us. If you look at in India, the many jail terms he underwent, Right till the end of his life, he was protesting for justice and equality, not just in this country, but in America, where he was on the day Nehru died, 27 May 1964, in a civil rights protest. If you look at his pioneering activities for the freedom of Goa, so he was a remarkably courageous individual, and he was also a highly original thinker. And in his introduction, in the introduction to his book, can I please have silence, please? Those who want to carry on a parallel conversation are welcome to go elsewhere. It is disrespectful to Mr. Raghu Kumar and his book, not to me so much as to him. So I request you to please be silent. As I said, I'm happy if all of you want to leave this room, there's no problem. Or with Dr. Raghu Kumar or with Sri Ramashankar, but please be respectful. Okay, so Lohia was also a highly original thinker. And Raghu Kumar ji ends his book by remarking, I'm going to quote, along with Gandhi, Nehru, Rajaji, Bose, Ambedkar and Bhagat Singh. Listen to these names. Along with Gandhi, Nehru, Rajaji, Bose, Ambedkar and Bhagat Singh, Lohia contributed to what we may call an independent canon of Indian socio-political and economic theory. An independent canon of socio-political and economic theory. That is independent of the Western canon. Because the economic, cultural, historic, political configuration of 19th and 20th century India was very different from that of Europe and America. And we have these original thinkers, and he names many. Gandhi, Nehru, Rajaji, Bose, Ambedkar and Bhagat Singh. And to that we may add Phule, Tagore, Gokhale, Tilak, Agarkar, Kamaladevi Chattopadhyay, Jayaprakash Narayan, V.D. Savarkar and many others. So we had a very 19th and 20th century India produced many creative and original thinkers who were both thinkers and activists, who were reflecting on the direction society was taking and trying to change society as well. They were not pure intellectuals like me. They were actually thinker activists. And that's a very special feature of modern Indian intellectual and political history, which we have now lost. You know, now we have Narendra Modi and Amit Shah as our nation's intellectual guide. Right? And we know what direction they would like us to go in. It's not just politically pernicious, but also intellectually impoverished. You know, when Amit Shah tells historians like me to rewrite India's history, he has no understanding of the diversity and richness of our history. So this tradition, and that's the same, that would be true also of the Congress Party or the BRS or any other regional party. The category of the politician who's also a reflective and original thinker essentially dies probably with Jayaprakash Narayan, who is of course outlived Lohia by about 12 years. Now, so there is, I'm glad that Raghu Kumar has brought attention to this very rich tradition of original thinker activists. As I said, thinker activists who are interested in transforming society, leading political movements, forming political parties, but also providing deep insights on the churning within Indian society and politics. Now, in this canon, Lohia's original contributions were several, and Raghu Kumar talks about that. And particularly his views on caste and on industrial society. You know, Marxists had a very impoverished understanding of social inequality in India. They thought caste is just a proxy for class. And I think Lohia, along with Ambedkar, was a political thinker who showed that caste was an autonomous axis of social inequality that often acted independent of class. And Lohia's writings on caste are of profound interest, and his writings on industrial society. In fact, Lohia suggests, he doesn't show it directly, he suggests that industrialization, even under socialist auspices, was alienating, dehumanizing, and exploitative. So if you adopt the same methods of production, you know, that the capitalists did, which is actually what the Soviets did. You know, Lenin was a great admirer of the American thinker Frederick Winslow Taylor, who was very interested in increasing worker productivity. You know, Soviet industrialization was extremely centralized, and Lohia was a critic not merely of capitalism but of industrial society. And of course, he had not visited the Soviet Union, but he had read about it, and he had seen how the centralization of power, the forms of production, the exploitative, degrading forms of production adopted in Soviet Russia were uncannily similar to those adopted in capitalist America. So Lohia was a original thinker in this canon, like Ambedkar, like Gandhi, like Nehru, like Rajaji, like Kamala Devi. He provided deep and original insights into Indian history, politics, culture, and that is the merit of Raghu Kumar's book. Now, I must say that I personally have ambivalent feelings for Lohia. I am not a Lohiaite. I am not a Marxist either. I am not an Ambedkarite. I am not a Gandhian. I don't believe that writers should be excessively reverential towards any particular individual. I have ambivalent feelings towards Lohia. Of course, I never met him. I think he was a greatly original thinker, which I have mentioned. But I also find his style too abrasive and polemic. I can understand why he was so charismatic. I mean, Gopal Singh ji, you met Lohia?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So people like you, or our dear friend Ravina Somaya ji, who actually met Lohia, was a very charismatic guy. He captivated you. You know, among the people I admired who were transformed by Lohia was a Kannada writer, U.R. Ananthamurthy, who was a friend of mine, and the great historian and archivist Haridev Sharma, who when he said Dak Sahab, there was a reverence. Dak Sahab ऐसा कहते थे. Dak Sahab ने ये बोला. Dak Sahab ने ये किया. Dak Sahab ने ये लिखा. So I can see that he was a very charismatic man. Maybe if I had come under his spell personally, I have had any ambivalence towards him. But since I never met him, I was 9 years old when he died, and I read about him. As I said, I admire his courage, his personal courage, his patriotism, his intellectual power, his deep insights into caste and industrial society. But I yet have some problems with him, which I'd like to place before you. Two problems in particular. One was his polemical style. You know, in his last chapter, Raghu Kumarji quotes Ramanand Mishra, who compared Lenin to Lohia. You know, I don't know how many of you are on social media, but Lenin would have been a super troll on Twitter. He was incredibly vicious and personal. And it's not surprising that Lohia was compared to Lenin, because sometimes his style was like that. You know, I think it was not like Gandhi or Nehru, who, even when they disagreed courteously. You know, there was never a raw personal edge to Lohia, for example, in his criticism of Nehru. So I find that problematic. And I suspect, though I haven't documented this, I suspect that the splits in the socialist movement from the 50s onwards were in part because of Dr. Lohia's abrasive personality. So that's I think one issue I have with is his style. You know, during the pandemic, one of the people who passed away in the pandemic was the great American civil rights leader John Lewis, who came many times to India, was a great admirer of Gandhi, and when he was asked, what did you learn from Gandhi? He said, how to disagree without being disagreeable. How to disagree without being disagreeable. And of course, that's not a lesson which our current day politicians follow. But I regret to say Dr. Lohia sometimes didn't follow it either. He didn't really, despite his admiration for Gandhi, he didn't learn this. That courtesy in disagreement is also a, it's a more refined and a better form of politics. The other, of course, reservation I have about Lohia is his obsession with the English language. You know, I think he was a wonderful writer in English, by the way. It's interesting that though he was a marvelous stylist, he did not want Indians to learn English. And I particularly cherish the debate that he had with Rajaji about English, where Lohia was keen that South Indians learn Hindi or abandon English. and Lohia kind of argued that English is a foreign language, and Rajaji replied that if Saraswati is the goddess of language, she gave birth to every language including English, so English is an Indian language. Now, so I think that having said that, having stated my, shall we say, my reservations about Lohia, I would like to again underline that he was a remarkably courageous human being, a selfless patriot, and a highly original thinker, which is why it is so good to have Sri Raghu Kumar's book on him. That brings him back into the debate about where India is and where India might be going. Now, having spoken about the book and Lohia, let me turn to the socialist tradition more broadly. As a historian, now, I'm going to say a little bit in the last part of my presentation about the Indian socialist movement, not from the perspective of its ideology and its philosophy, but from the perspective of its place in Indian history from the 1930s onwards. You can date the birth of. If one was to look at the period in which Indian socialism was influential, I suppose you would start with 1934, which is the formation of the Congress Socialist Party, and you would end probably in the early 90s, when the socialist movement fragments into many different parts, and you have, of course, you don't have a coherent socialist movement anymore. Not 1977, which of course were emergent with the Janata Party, but probably later. So for about 60 years, it was politically influential in India and intellectually influential. Now, what is significant about the socialist tradition in 20th century India? While it lived, while it had energy, dynamism, influence, and before it kind of disappeared into more or less oblivion, what was distinctive? And one way of understanding the distinctive features of the socialist movement is to set it against the Congress Party on the one side and the communist movement on the other. Two other very influential political trends. The communists who are obviously in power in West Bengal and in Kerala and Tripura, and who, as Raghu Kumar ji suggested, consider themselves the sole and only custodians of socialism. So how did socialists, of which tendency Lohia was an important protagonist, how did socialists differ from the communists and the Congress? Because actually the socialists originally were in the Congress Party. Now, the socialists thought the Congress leadership too conservative on questions of economic justice particularly, and women's rights secondarily, which is why they started a ginger group called the Congress Socialist Party. So they felt that the other, the kind of mainstream of the Congress, represented particularly by Vallabhbhai Patel and Rajendra Prasad. I would say those two figures, also Govind Ballabh Pant to a lesser extent, who were older than them, very influential, and of course to that you may add B.C. Roy, Nijalingappa, all the major provincial leaders of the Morarji Desai, all the major provincial leaders of the Congress. The socialists who were part of the Congress, who were very active in the freedom struggle, who courted arrest many times, felt that the Congress leadership was too conservative, particularly on questions of economic justice. That is, too sympathetic to the landlords, not really interested in economic redistribution, and also in terms of women's rights. And I'll say a little bit about women's rights in a bit. At the same time, they were opposed to the conservative congressmen on the right, and they were also opposed to the communists on the left. Because the communists on the left were not patriotic enough. The congressmen were patriots but not radical. The communists were radical but not patriots. Of course, the most famous division occurred in 1942 during the Quit India movement, when the communists basically supported the British Raj. But generally, if you look at before and after, Indian communists, in many ways, their besetting weakness has been that their fatherland is always some other country apart from India. It used to be Russia, then it was China, then it became Cuba, then Vietnam, then Venezuela, somewhere anywhere else. I mean, in JNU, in the communist heyday, Hugo Chavez was kind of the greatest icon possible, you know. So I think the socialists were deeply patriotic. You know, they loved India. They found in India, they didn't think India was perfect. Unlike the Hindutvawadis, they knew there were a lot of problems with our society, particularly when it came to class and caste and gender. But, you know, essentially they were patriots. And the communists were, all through this period, the 30s and the 40s and the 50s, the Indian communists were tied to the apron strings of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union or the Communist Party of Great Britain, you know. So, this divide between the socialists and the communists became very stark during the 1942 movement. Now, if you look at the difference between socialism and communism in the Indian context, that is, if you look at, if you take a representative figure, Lohia and E.M.S. Namboodiripad, who was a profoundly, who one would add to the category of the thinker activist, who was a scholar, a writer, who wrote prolifically in both Malayalam and in English. Now, what were the kind of three things that divided the socialists from the communists? Firstly was this whole issue of, is India your country or is the Soviet Union your country? Primary affiliation, you know, that's one thing. The second thing, and I think it should not be underestimated, is on the question of non-violence versus violence. You know, when you are settling political disputes, do you do it non-violently or violently? And this is the socialist get from Gandhi. I mean, this is clear that there is, for a little while, I think Lohia never really flirts with violence. JP, there's a little bit of JP in the late 30s and early 40s where he's tempted by violent revolution. But the more he gets to know Gandhi, the more he appreciates the moral power and the political efficacy of non-violence. So that's the second difference. That communists think that the only form of social change is violent revolution, and the socialists really believe in satyagraha and civil disobedience. And the third, and I think in some ways, the most fundamental philosophical and ideological difference between socialists and communists in the Indian context has to do with political and economic power. For the communists, it was centralized. You know, it's centralized in the state and in the party that represents the state, the Politburo that represents the party, and the General Secretary that represents the Politburo. So actually, the term personality cult, you know, we now hear the term personality cult applied with regard to Narendra Modi, which is accurate. There is a personality cult around Narendra Modi. But the term personality cult was first used about Stalin. So central actual political power is communism. Decentralization of political power is socialism. It's no accident that the socialists were the most proactive in promoting decentralization in Indian political life. Likewise with economic power. For the socialists, it's centralized. You know, they say the factory will be owned by the state, but it will still be a very large factory in which the workers are the slave of the machine. Whereas the socialists believed in decentralization of economic power as well. So that's, I think, the most important distinction. And in all these ways in which the socialists differed from the communists, in their deep patriotism, in their empathy with non-violent struggle, and in their skepticism of the centralization of political and economic power, actually they were influenced by Gandhi. You know, they may not always have acknowledged Gandhi's influence, but it is by living close to Gandhi and being with Gandhi that they acquired these orientations. Now, the socialists are now gone. There are no socialists active in politics. The last remaining socialists have started dynastic parties, you know, Mulayam Singh Yadav and Lalu Prasad Yadav. But why should we remember them today when they aren't active in Indian politics? Lohia died more than 55 years ago. You know, Acharya and Narendra Dev maybe 60 or 70 years ago. All of them, JP died in the late 70s. Why should we remember Indian socialism? Why should we remember the Indian socialist tradition today? Now, one reason, of course, is because of their heroism and sacrifice during the freedom struggle. That, you know, if I may make one joke about our current regime. When the state raided the BBC in Delhi a couple of weeks ago. One MP of Trinamool Congress, Mahua Moitra, who's many of us admire for her independent thinking, she tweeted when she said the government has raided the BBC office in Delhi for the second successive day, and then she said that's the closest the BJP has got to fighting the British. Okay, now the BJP and the RSS had nothing to do with the freedom struggle. Their ancestors were absent. Right. The communists were present for a bit, but in the crucial period of 41, 42, 43, they were informers for the Raj. The socialists should be, of course, were truly heroic in their contribution to the freedom struggle. That's one reason we should remember them, right? But we should also remember them for their philosophical and ideological contributions. I think that's why it's important that this book has come out. And there are at least 4 areas of social and political and cultural life in which the Indian socialists, what they represented, what they wrote, how they acted, speaks to us today in 2023. The first is the issue of decentralization, which I've talked about. You know, I think it's tragic that everything is centralized either in Delhi or in the state capital. You know, a truly functioning democracy would require decentralization of political, economic, legislative powers to municipalities, to mayoralties, to district panchayats, to village panchayats, and so on. I think decentralization is the way forward. Also, really, to have a more meaningful and sustainable economic growth. That's one area in which the socialists matter. The second area is gender equality. You know, perhaps Raghu Kumar could have said a little bit about that in his book. You know, one of the aspects about the socialist movement was the number of remarkable women in it. You know, Kamala Devi Chattopadhyay, Aruna Asaf Ali, Mrinal Gore, Pramila Dandavate, and many, many others. Satyavati, many, many others. So, if you look at and how they really made the Indian national movement much less patriarchal and male-dominated. And also, you know, if you look at, I'm just reading recently, this happens to be the centenary year of Madhu Dandavate. So I was reading a little bit about him and his remarkable wife, Pramila Dandavate, who was actually appointed the first chairperson of the National Commission of Women. And she refused to accept because the government had appointed her, lost its majority. She was also a person of great principle. So this whole question of gender equality, and also, as a friend pointed out to me, gender equality in their personal relations. I mean, if you consider the relationship between Madhu Limai and Champa Limai, Madhu Dandavate and Pramila Dandavate, and Dr. Lohia and Roma Mitra, you know, which is, I wish we would talk more about that. I mean, he had a deep and intense and loving relationship, not sanctified by marriage, so but who cares, with a remarkable teacher at Miranda House. So even in that personal relationship, not only in bringing women into politics, not only in promoting gender equality, but even in their personal relationships. You know, it was not like Gandhi and Kasturba and Jawaharlal and Kamala, which is one of, you know, essentially neglect, you know, and overbearing dominance. And God knows how the Hindutva of the past have, you know, treated women in their marital relations. So I think this is one aspect of the Indian socialist tradition, which is quite appealing. And I wish, you know, unfortunately Indians are too prudish. You know, you write a biography about Lohia and Roma Mitra would not be mentioned. You know, which I think is sad, because I think it's a very, I mean, in fact, some of his most interesting letters, as you would know, his letters from Arunachal and others were written to this remarkable woman. So I think that's one area in which the socialists, the communists, by the way, are very patriarchal. I mean, there are virtually no important women in the Indian communist movement. The third area in which I think the socialists made a very important contribution was in culture, in art, in theatre, in music, in plays. And fourthly, the socialists had a kind of, you could say, environmental sensibility. You know, they saw the devastation that modern technology and industrialization could do to nature and the natural environment. Even Lohia understood it, you know, partly because of his travels. I think he was suspicious of large dams for that reason. You know, they wanted bottom-up development, grassroots technology, that would be human-centered and that would not destroy the environment. If you look at my own state, Karnataka, some of the pioneers of the environmental movement came from a socialist background, like the writer Shivaram Karat. So these four kind of areas: political and economic decentralization, gender equality, the importance of culture, and environmental sensibility are aspects of the socialist tradition that very much are relevant today, even though the tradition itself no longer is politically influenced. Now, I end by saying that I'm now in my mid-60s, and I gave a talk yesterday which Raghu Kumar mentioned on the challenge of contemporary history. And there are many aspects of our post-independence history that need to be written about. And one of the tasks before a young scholar would be to write a history of the Indian socialist movement. There's a very good recent biography of George Fernandez, which the young scholar in Delhi, Rahul Ramagundam, has published. I urge all of you to read it. But a history of the Indian socialist movement through the 20th century, its rise, its maturity, its fall, its relevance, its different political avatars, the kind of charismatic and original thinkers and activists associated with it, some of whom I mentioned in my talk. And tragically, the socialists have fallen through the cracks of Indian historiography. The communists have had lots of historians wanting to write about them, affiliated to them. The Congress Party has had lots of historians who wanted to write about them, who are loyalists of the Congress Party. Now you have, of course, all kinds of people coming out to write worshipful histories of Hindutva, because the BJP is in power, so they will find their own Dharwadi historians, no problem. They already found them. And glorifying Savarkar and Golwalkar and saying nasty things about Gandhi and Nehru and others, that's all happening. So these three political tendencies, the communists, the Congress and the BJP, have historians who are willing to do their bidding, but the socialists have none. And I'm not saying you have to write a reverential history of the socialist movement. I would like a history of the socialist movement to be written by an Indian in his or her 30s.
Qurban Ali is doing it.
I said in her 30s. I said Qurban Ali is a good man, but he has an identification. He's doing the work. I welcome it. I'm glad he will write it, but his will be an insider's history of the socialist. I'm glad he's doing it. But he also needs an outsider's history of the socialist movement, written by someone who never saw Lohia, never saw Jayaprakash, whose father and uncle never saw Lohia, never saw Jayaprakash, never saw Kamla Devi, who was kind of absolutely immune to the aura around them and approaching them afresh. And I think that would be a real service, because they were a remarkable and unjustly forgotten chapter in our modern history. And I'm glad because of that reason, that's one of the reasons to welcome Sri Raghu Kumar. Thank you.
थैंक यू सर। अभी मैं श्री हमारे सीनियर सोशलिस्ट नायक रामदास जी से निवेदन करता हूं कि वो कृपया आए और रामचंद्र गुहा जी का सम्मान करें। रामदास जी और पीजे सूरी कृपया आए और शॉल और मोमेंटो लेकर रामचंद्र गुहा जी का सम्मान करें।
Come on.
May or June.
But thank you, Sri Ramchandra Murthy.
అధ్యక్షుడు రామశేఖర్ జీ గారు, ప్రఖ్యాత రచయిత రామచంద్ర గుహ గారు, గారు, గోపాల్జీ గారు, రఘుల్ కుమార్ గారు, సభలో ఉన్న గొప్ప పార్లమెంటేరియన్ సోమనాథేశ్వర గారు, ఇతర మిత్రులందరికీ నమస్కారం. వాస్తవానికి ఈరోజు వ్యక్తి సుదర్శన్ రెడ్డి గారు రావాల్సిండే. ఆయనకి బంధువులు ఎవరో పోవటం వల్ల రాలేకపోయారు. ఆయన బదులు నేను వచ్చాను. ఈ పుస్తకం పీబీటీ రామ్మోహన్ లోహియా అనే గొప్ప పుస్తకం, అంత చదవాల్సిన పుస్తకం. లోహియా గారు ఎందుకు గొప్పవాడు, ఎందుకు డిఫరెంట్గా ఆలోచించేవాడు, ఎందుకు ఒరిజినల్గా ఆలోచించేవాడు. సార్, I like it for personalities from freedom movement, mainstream movement. Subhash, Bhagat Singh, they don't come into picture. Gandhi, Ambedkar, Nehru, and Lohiya in that order. Lohiya was the original thinker. He managed to go to jail even during Nehru's rule. And he was so critical of anything and everything. అటువంటి వ్యక్తి ఒక అంబేద్కర్ కంపేర్డ్ బుద్ధిస్ట్ ఫిలాసఫీ అండ్ మార్క్సిస్ట్ ఫిలాసఫీ. లోహియా కంపేర్డ్ మార్క్స్ అండ్ గాంధీ. Both Ambedkar and Lohiya wrote on caste. No other leader has written on caste, casteism. Annihilation of caste is Ambedkar's contribution. Likewise, Lohiya also wrote extensively on caste. And one more extra accomplishment on part of Lohiya was his thesis on Itihas Chakra. He would have written in English itself, but he wrote in Hindi. It came in Telugu. It was released recently here in Telugu. He likes the character of Draupadi more than that of Sita and Savitri. And why? And he is an expert in creating controversies and arguing. రామ్మోహన్ లోహియా ఎంత దూరం అంటారంటే, ఒక ఆర్గ్యుమెంట్ తీసుకొని ఆర్గ్యుమెంట్ చేయడం కోసం ఆర్గ్యుమెంట్ చేస్తున్నారా, ప్రశ్నించడం కోసం ప్రశ్నిస్తున్నారా అని. అంటే కాంగ్రెస్ వాళ్ళు ఉన్నారు, గాంధీ గారు ఉన్నారు, నెహ్రూ గారు ఉన్నారు, వీళ్ళందరితో ఏకీభావం ఉంది. ఒకసారి పార్లమెంట్లో నెహ్రూ ప్రైమ్ మినిస్టర్ ఉండగా ఆనాటి రూపాయి విలువ 25 పైసలే. అంటే అన్నారు 4 అనాలే, అప్పుడు పైసలు కూడా లేవు. Today's rupee is actually worth 4 annas. And European కోసం he spent one day arguing in parliament. అంటే అటువంటి ఎకనమిస్ట్గా పొలిటికల్గా ఇది కాకుండా ఇతిహాసం రాసిన వ్యక్తి ఇటువంటి పుస్తకాన్ని రాసినందుకు రఘుకుమార్ గారిని అభినందిస్తున్నాను. దీన్ని రిలీజ్ చేయడానికి వచ్చినందుకు రామచంద్ర గుహ గారిని నేను గొప్పగా గౌరవిస్తాను. రామచంద్ర గుహ గారు నిన్న మంత్రుల మాట్లాడినప్పుడు నేను కూడా ఉన్నాను. I was there in the Mantar meeting, sir, yesterday. One lady asked me a question first and last. What do you think about Congress? That was the question put to me by many people in many meetings. When I went to Tenali recently, they asked me, you are criticizing both Congress and BJP. What should we do? What is the message you are giving to us? Should we vote for BJP or Congress, or should we not vote at all? There are only 2 contenders in many states. In states like Telangana, there are 3 or 4. But a public intellectual, I think, should be able to guide the people. which is the lesser evil we should be able to tell at least. We don't have any party which is ideal. Congress is bad. BJP also is bad. We say both are bad. We criticize both Rahul Gandhi and Narendra Modi. But they are the only two persons who are relevant in Indian politics today. If there is any challenge from opposition to Narendra Modi, it would be from Congress. And Congress cannot have any other leader than Rahul Gandhi. It would have been better that they opted for somebody else like Shashi Tharoor. But it is not possible. I don't know whether he would be appointed to the working committee also. I don't know. Because it is given to the Congress president to appoint people for a working committee. They are not going to be elections. But in the given situation, what the message to the people who are looking for some guidance? Should we vote for BJP or Congress or TRS here? All are bad. We should be able to tell which is lesser evil. That Lohiya used to say. Lohiya used to criticize Marxism. He criticized Congress. He was very critical. Ravindra Yadav said in this book, he was quoted in this book, since Lohiya criticized everybody ruthlessly, we should criticize Lohiya also with the same kindness. We should be able to criticize Lohiya and say which is the stuff that is useful to the within the society, within the politics, and which can be left alone. There are, as Guwahati said, there are not many books on socialism. There are not many books in English on Lohiya. Given that Karthik, the book that has come in Telugu recently, that was released here, had not come in English. Raval Somaya Garu has asked me to bring it in English. I am trying to do that. But there is a lot of literature by Lohiya, which is in Hindi, which has to come in English. I think Rav Kumar is capable of doing some more work, but as Lohiya said, people in 30s and 40s, as Guwahati said, people in 30s and 40s should take up their mission. He was telling me that, he was telling the audience yesterday at the Mantan that he has established a new India society where people are encouraged to do research and write books. That's a very good idea. We can have similar thing here in Hyderabad also. Hyderabad was second home for Lohiya. But Lohiya thought Hyderabad is the best place to get the whole literature. Has got about 9 volumes, translated into English, and then throw it for debate. I thank Rav Kumar Garu and others for the opportunity given to me. Thank you very much.
थैंक यू रामचंद्र मूर्ति गारू. नाउ मैं अभी श्री राम नारायण यादव जी और श्री ए नारायण जी से निवेदन करूंगा कि रामचंद्र मूर्ति जी का स्वागत करें. श्री राम नारायण यादव, श्री ए नारायण जी.
Pay my respects and reverence to this grand princeties of Hyderabad and Secunderabad, and of course Badri Vishal Pitti and his trust, without which a young man of 19 years of age or 18 years of age like me, it was just impossible for people like us, young people like us, to know and read about Lohiya's thoughts without the books published by Badri Vishal Pitti. So whatever I am today, or the way I'm shaped, is because of literature published by the Lohiya Nyas and Badri Vishal Pitti. Ramchandra Guha, Professor Guha, as all we know, is a great intellectual and a researcher. And he has said many things about books, which actually I was delighted to see and read Raghu Kumar's books. After a long time, I saw a book which was objective, critical, and still it is so worth reading. एग्जैक्टली जो डॉक्टर लोहिया सोचते थे, लिखते थे, वैसा ही रघु कुमार जी ने उसको पढ़ा, समझा और लिखा। इसमें कोई भी मिलावट अपनी तरफ से, उनकी तरफ से नहीं हुई। और इसलिए उन्होंने व्हील ऑफ हिस्ट्री की जो उनकी अपनी सोच थी, सिविलाइजेशंस के बारे में, कल्चर के बारे में, वो ठीक से आई। जो उनकी आर्थिक सोच थी, खास तौर पे इकोनॉमिक्स आफ्टर मार्क्स, वो ठीक से उनकी किताब में आई है। और जो उनके जो कंट्रीब्यूशंस थे, खास तौर पर क्लास और कास्ट के बारे में, क्लास एंड कास्ट के बीच में ऑसिलेशंस जैसे से होता है अलग अलग जगह, अलग अलग विश्व के हिस्सों में या सिविलाइजेशंस में, उसमें उस समय फ्रीडम मूवमेंट जो हिंदुस्तान का था, उसका सेकंड रैंक की लीडरशिप थी, वो करीब करीब सारी थी और बड़े बड़े नाम उसमें थे। उसमें जो नाम आपने बताए वो तो सारे थे ही थे। और उसमें सब के सब लोग मार्क्सिज्म के प्रति अपनी समझ और आस्था व्यक्त करते थे कि हम मार्क्सिस्ट। जयप्रकाश जी के बारे में तो गांधी जी ने कहा ही था कि समाजवाद के बारे में जो जयप्रकाश जी नहीं जानते हैं, ऐसा कोई नहीं है हिंदुस्तान में जो जानता हो, कोई नहीं जानता है। लेकिन इस सारे के सारे लोगों में, इस गैलेक्सी ऑफ लीडरशिप में अकेले लोहिया थे जिन्होंने अपनी अलग विचारधारा, अपने अलग विचार बनाने शुरू किए। और इसी बात पर अन्य नेताओं से जो सीएसपी के थे, उनका एक विरोध होना शुरू हुआ। इसी बात पर हुआ और किसी बात पर नहीं हुआ। वो कोई व्यक्तिगत बात नहीं थी। ये जरूर था जब 1946 में क्लियर हो गया कि आज़ादी आने ही वाली है और अंग्रेज आने वाले हैं, तो ये कांग्रेस सोशलिस्ट पार्टी में तय हुआ कि अब हमें कांग्रेस से अलग होना चाहिए, क्योंकि देश आजाद होने वाला है और विपक्ष में, प्रतिपक्ष में कौन रहेगा, ये एक महत्वपूर्ण बात होने वाली है। हमें मालूम है कि सत्ता किसको पकड़ती, सत्ता में कौन बड़े लोग हैं जो सत्ता को संभालने वाले हैं, नेहरू जी या पटेल या और लोग। लेकिन ऐसे कौन लोग होंगे जो भारत में आर्थिक विषयों पर, सामाजिक विषयों पर इस सरकार के ऊपर एक किस्म का प्रेशर ग्रुप, जिसको जिंजर ग्रुप कहा जाता है, जिससे कौन करेंगे, ये सोच करके फैसला हुआ था कि हम लोग अलग हो रहे हैं। यानी उन सारी लीडरशिप के दिमाग में पावर कहीं नहीं थी, पॉलिटिकल पावर कहीं नहीं थी। और इन्होंने जो, एक बात तो खैर सरदार पटेल और डॉक्टर लोहिया का कुछ जब थोड़ी बहुत कहा सुनी हो गई बिरला भवन के बाहर, तो डॉक्टर लोहिया ने खुद उनसे कहा कि जितना आपने बलिदान किया उससे कम हमने नहीं किया है आज़ादी के लिए। क्योंकि थोड़ा सा सरदार पटेल और सोशलिस्टों में झंझट रहती थी। अभी रामानंदन मिश्रा का एक आर्टिकल मुझे पढ़ने को मिला बहुत रिसेंटली, और भी आर्टिकल मिले हैं जो कि मैं 23 मार्च को एक नई किताब के रूप में पेश कर रहा हूँ, उसको छाप रहा हूँ। उससे कई लोग जो उस जमाने के सीएसपी के लोग थे और जो गांधी जी के भी नजदीक थे, उससे ये साबित होता है कि लोहिया और जवाहरलाल नेहरू बहुत नजदीक के रिश्ते में थे। और ये तब से थे जबकि एआईसीसी का हेडक्वार्टर आनंद भवन इलाहाबाद में नेहरू जी के घर में होता था। उसके बाद जब प्राइम मिनिस्टर डिक्लेयर हो गए नेहरू जी 47 के पहले, तो उन्होंने लिखा है कि कोई दिन नहीं जाता था जब नेहरू जी के घर में लोहिया बगैर अपॉइंटमेंट के शाम को जाके डिनर न करते हो। और एक वो डिनर का दिन था, एक वो शाम थी जब नेहरू जी ने गांधी जी के बारे में कुछ ऐसा कहा जो कि लोहिया को बहुत बुरा लगा। और नेहरू उस दिन आपा खो बैठे, तो लोहिया जी ने कहा कि अगर ऐसा हुआ है तो आप गांधी जी को समझा दो कि मुझे ब्यूरोक्रेट्स ने, अफसरों ने मुझे बेवकूफ़ बनाया, यही शब्द थे, मुझे बेवकूफ़ बनाया। तो उस पर नेहरू जी आपा खो बैठे और दोनों के बीच में बगैर वाद विवाद के इतना टेंशन हुआ कि उसी दिन लोहिया ने तय किया कि मैं आज के बाद जवाहरलाल से मिलने नहीं आऊंगा। कहने का मेरा मतलब यह है कि कभी भी व्यक्तिगत सवाल पर या व्यक्तिगत कोई गुस्सा या कुछ रंज हो, ऐसा नहीं था। इन दोनों के बीच में हमेशा से एक राजनीतिक कारणों से मुद्दों पर हमेशा से विवाद जब भी बना। और जब लोहिया को बुलाया नेहरू जी ने कि आओ और एआईसीसी का जनरल सेक्रेटरी बनो, तब तक नेहरू जी प्रधानमंत्री बन चुके थे। और लोहिया को बुला के कहा, जयप्रकाश भी उस मीटिंग में थे, जयप्रकाश लोहिया दोनों साथ गए थे कि तुम आकर के पार्टी के जनरल सेक्रेटरी बनो, पार्टी संभालो। तो लोहिया ने 3 शर्त लिखी जिसका जिक्र रघु कुमार जी ने भी अपनी किताब में किया है कि अगर ये 3 शर्त मानते हैं तो मैं कांग्रेस में आने को तैयार हूँ और हम लोग कांग्रेस में यानी सारे सोशलिस्ट आपके साथ काम करने को तैयार हैं। वो 3 शर्तें थी कि कांग्रेस अध्यक्ष प्राइम मिनिस्टर नहीं बनेगा, कांग्रेस पार्टी को ये अधिकार होना चाहिए कि अपनी सरकार की भी वाजिब आलोचना कर सके। एक तीसरा और पॉइंट था, रुकवानी में भूल रहा हूं उसमें, तीसरा एक और था। तो जब उन्होंने नेहरू जी ने तत्काल मना कर दिया कि ये संभव नहीं है। इस बात को थोड़ा बारीकी से ऐसे सोचना चाहिए कि नेहरू जी के दिमाग में उस समय से ये क्लियर था कि पार्टी और सरकार दोनों एक ही व्यक्ति चलाएगा, जो कि बाद में आज तक आप देख रहे हैं कि कांग्रेस पार्टी ने जो भी किया है। नेहरू के प्रति लोहिया कभी डिस्कर्टियस या एब्रेसिव या एग्रेसिव नहीं थे, वो उनके बहुत मधुर संबंध थे, बाद में भी कभी नहीं रहे। लेकिन इसमें एक बात यहाँ आती है कि लोहिया की जब हम कॉन्ट्रीब्यूशंस की बात करते हैं तो उसमें एक बात आती है, लोहिया ने गांधी के सत्याग्रह को आजाद हिंदुस्तान में जिंदा किया। ये काम किसी ने नहीं किया, डॉक्टर लोहिया ने किया। 10 बार आजाद हिंदुस्तान में वो जेल में गए और ये नेहरू जी की जानकारी में था कि कई बार आजाद हिंदुस्तान की जेल में लोहिया को टॉर्चर किया गया। मैं 1942 की बात नहीं कर रहा हूं, 44 की नहीं कर रहा हूं, 42-44 की नहीं, अंग्रेज के द्वारा नहीं, लाहौर फोर्ट में नहीं, जेल में नहीं, कई जगह 3 या 4 बार नेहरू जी की जानकारी में लोहिया जी को जेलों में टॉर्चर किया गया। और जितनी बार वो अंग्रेज की जेल में रहे उससे ज्यादा बार वो नेहरू जी की जेल में रहे। तो एग्रेसिव कौन था या डिस्कर्टियस कौन था? एक इतना नजदीक का दोस्त जिसको पकड़ के थाने में बिठाया जा रहा है और पुलिस वाले ने उसको कुर्सी से जकड़ा हुआ है, बांधा हुआ है और उसका अंगूठा लेकर एक कागज पे जबरदस्ती लगवाया जा रहा है और वो आकर के मजिस्ट्रेट के सामने कह रहा है कि मेरा ये अंगूठा जबरदस्ती लगवाया गया है और मैं उम्मीद करता था कि ये मैं बड़ा शर्मिंदा हूं कि अंगूठा टूटा क्यों नहीं उस दिन। इसकी लंबी कहानी है, ये तथ्य हैं। इन तथ्यों पर जैसा आपने कहा, सोशलिस्ट मूवमेंट का जब इतिहास जब भी लिखा जाएगा तो ये लिखा जाएगा कि सोशलिस्टों के साथ क्या क्या बर्ताव आजाद भारत की सरकारों ने किए। लोहिया 4 या 5 साम्राज्यवाद के खिलाफ लड़े थे, नेहरू जी एक के खिलाफ लड़े थे, गांधी जी भी एक के खिलाफ लड़े थे, अंग्रेज के खिलाफ। लोहिया अंग्रेज के खिलाफ लड़े, जेल गए, सबको पता ही है। पुर्तगाली साम्राज्य के खिलाफ लड़े 1946 में
उन्होंने मरे हुए गोवा आंदोलन को जिंदा करके और गोवा की आजादी का आखिरी सफल आंदोलन 1946 में शुरू किया, लोहिया जी ने किया। नेपाल की राणाशाही, राजा महाराजा जो था, जो सामंतवाद था, उसके खिलाफ लोहिया लड़े और अमेरिका जाकर के आजादी के लिए, रेशलिज्म के खिलाफ, रंग भेद के खिलाफ लोहिया जाके वहां भी जेल में गए, यानी गिरफ्तार हुए। मुझे ऐसा ध्यान है, मुझे याद नहीं आ रहा है, पांचवा कहीं और था।
In India also.
Huh?
He fought against India also. Indian.
हाँ, ये बस, यस। और पांचवी लड़ाई उन्होंने अपने ही देश में, अपनी सरकार जो उनकी इलेक्टेड गवर्नमेंट थी जिसके लिए वो गए, ये इतना बड़ा त्यागी बलिदानी आदमी था, तो उसने जब गांधी जी के सिविल, उसने गांधी जी का सत्याग्रह को नया नाम दिया सिविल नाफरमानी। सिविल नाफरमानी के खिलाफ विनोबा भावे बहुत बोलते थे और सारे गांधीयंस बोलते थे और कहते थे कि चूंकि तुम में गुस्सा है, क्रोध है, जिसके खिलाफ तुम आंदोलन कर रहे हो, तो तुम्हारी सत्याग्रह बेकार है। सत्याग्रह को तो, सत्याग्रही को तो एकदम स्थिति प्रज्ञ ऋषि की भांति कोई गुस्सा नहीं होना चाहिए, कोई बिल्कुल अहिंसा भाव आना चाहिए। तब लोहिया ने ये प्रस्तावित किया कि अगर मुझ में क्रोध नहीं है व्यवस्था के खिलाफ, और अगर इस सिस्टम के खिलाफ मेरे मन में गुस्सा ही नहीं आएगा, तो मैं सत्याग्रह के लिए प्रेरित क्यों होऊंगा। उन्होंने गांधी का सत्याग्रह जिंदा किया, जो कि गांधी जी के बाद किसी ने नहीं किया। अकेला आदमी था जिसने गांधी के प्रतिरोध को जिंदा किया। बहुत सारी और बातें हैं जिसमें खासतौर पे गुहा साहब ने लैंग्वेज की बात कही है। 6 भाषाएं जानते थे और अंग्रेजी के खिलाफ वो नहीं थे। अंग्रेजी के उस उपयोग के खिलाफ थे जहां साधारण जनता आती है। और उन्होंने कहा कि मैं अंग्रेजी के खिलाफ इसलिए हूं कि 1% अंग्रेजी जानने वाले हिंदुस्तान में लोग हैं, और वो सारे के सारे कौन हैं? वो बड़े लोग हैं, पैसे वाले हैं, या अफसर हैं, या पॉलिटिक्स में हैं, और यही लोग अपनी भाषा में के जरिए राज करना चाहते हैं। तो भाषा के जरिए शोषण, भाषा के जरिए दूसरे पर राज, इसलिए वो अंग्रेजी के खिलाफ थे। और ये लोहिया ही थे जिसके कारण हर राज्य में, हर प्रांत में, हर अंचल में आज मातृभाषाओं की इज्जत है और वो स्थापित है। उनका ही कंट्रीब्यूशन भी था, बहुत सारे कंट्रीब्यूशन हैं, उसकी हम क्या बात करें। लेकिन जैसे छोटी छोटी बातें हैं, 1950, 52, 54 में उन्होंने कहा कि भारत में जो काम धर्म के लोगों को करना चाहिए, वो मैं बोल रहा हूं कि नदियां साफ करो और तीर्थों को साफ करो। 1950, 1952, 54 उसी दौरान उन्होंने कहा कि मैं गांव में देखता हूं कि गांव की औरतें लकड़ी का जो चूल्हा है उसके धुएं के कारण उनकी आंखें खराब हो रही हैं। मेरी सरकार बने तो स्मोकलेस चूल्हा हर गांव में मिलना चाहिए। 50s में वो जैसा भी हुआ नहीं हुआ, मुझे, मैं उस पर भी कोई टिप्पणी नहीं करना चाहता हूं। हिमालयन पॉलिसी में जब उन्होंने कहा कि पूरा हिमालय का बेल्ट ये पूरे हिंदुस्तान को और एशिया के इन देशों को फल पैदावार कर सकता है, सरकारों ने नहीं किया, बाजार और किसानों ने वो चीज आज पैदा कर दी। आज उत्तराखंड, कश्मीर और हिमाचल के सारे खेत न सिर्फ सेब पैदा कर रहे हैं, कीवी पैदा कर रहे हैं, जापानी फ्रूट पैदा कर रहे हैं, वहां से तमाम फ्रूट तो आ रहा है। लेकिन अगर उसको कोई अच्छी सरकार हो तो उसको अगर और बढ़ाए तो पूरे भारत में फलों की पैदावार अकेले हिमालय की तराई के आसपास और हिमालय के जो उससे हो सकती है। अंग्रेज के जमाने से नहीं, मुगल के जमाने से लैंड रेवेन्यू था, किसानों पर लगान लगता था। लोहिया थे अकेले जिन्होंने कहा कि अगर मेरी सरकार बनी, और जब बनी मिली जुली, तो उन्होंने कहा कि चलो पहला काम ये करके आओ कि लैंड रेवेन्यू खत्म करो। ये इतिहास का तथ्य है कि बिहार के चीफ मिनिस्टर जो उनके थे कर्पूरी ठाकुर, वो आए तो उन्होंने कहा कि मैं नहीं मिलूंगा जब तक लैंड रेवेन्यू वापस नहीं होगा।
वो बैठे रहे बाहर घंटों नहीं, दिनों दिन, 2-3 दिन तक मिले नहीं कर्पूरी ठाकुर से कि मैं नहीं मिलूंगा जब तक कि किसानों पर से लगान वापस नहीं होगा। और यूपी में और बिहार में जहां जहां उनकी सम्मिलित सरकारें बनी, लोहिया ने सैकड़ों वर्षों से लागू जो था किसानों पर लगान, वो वापस करवाया। ऐसे चौखंबा राज का आपने बता ही दिया है कि उनका पहला मानना था कि ये जो स्टेट है, भारत की जो स्टेट है, इसके 4 खंबे होने चाहिए, गांव, प्रदेश वगैरह वगैरह। इस पर लगातार उन्होंने इस पर बोला, कहा। तो कॉन्ट्रीब्यूशन भी बहुत है, लेकिन इससे ये साबित नहीं होता है कि आज उनके मरने के 60 साल बाद करीब करीब उनके न रहने के बाद हम ये न सोचें कि उसके और ज़्यादा उस पर डेवलपमेंट में तो और ज़्यादा क्या हो सकता है और कहाँ कहाँ कमियाँ रह गई। हम सब देख रहे हैं कि लोहिया के मानने वालों में बहुत कमियाँ रही, इतनी ज़्यादा रही कि जैसे एक और उनका नारा था सोशलिस्ट पार्टी का उस समय, सोशलिस्टों ने बांधी गांठ, पिछड़े पावे 100 में 60। और उन्होंने कहा कि 60% रिजर्वेशन में औरतें भी शामिल हैं, पिछड़े भी शामिल हैं, औरतें भी शामिल हैं, और ये रिजर्वेशन हमको हर क्षेत्र में देना चाहिए। 100 में 60। अब ये 100 में 50 का कैप लगा, और फिर सुप्रीम कोर्ट ने उसको तोड़ दिया। अब अगर कोई सरकार ढंग की हो तो आप समझो कि 33% का, आज हम यहाँ बैठे हैं ना, लोहिया होते ना तो हम में से 2-3 को उठा के वहां बिठाते और ये 3 लोगों के यहाँ बिठाते, महिलाओं। और वो हमेशा कहते थे ये कैसी सभा है, इसमें महिला ऊपर नहीं है। जो आपने कहा महिलाओं के बारे में जो कह रहे हैं, बड़ा जानबूझ के कंट्रोवर्सी क्रिएट करते थे, ऐसा नहीं है। मुझे अच्छी तरह याद है, मैं जब दिल्ली यूनिवर्सिटी में पढ़ता था, ये सन 70 या 71 की बात होगी। रमा मित्रा मिरांडा में पढ़ाती थी और हमारे मित्र हैं जो हमसे सीनियर थे उस समय, राजकुमार जैन। तो मैं और राजकुमार हाथ में, उस समय मेरी हिंदी की हैंडराइटिंग कुछ अच्छी होती थी, लोग कहते थे दीवार पर बहुत अच्छी लगती है, तो हम लोग रंग लेकर के पूरे यूनिवर्सिटी में दीवारों पर लोहिया जी के नारे लिखते थे, यूनिवर्सिटी की दीवारों पर। तो मिरांडा हाउस की दीवार पर, जो लड़कियों का कॉलेज है, हमने लिखा, भारत की आदर्श नारी सावित्री नहीं द्रौपदी है, डॉक्टर लोहिया। इसको कहने की हिम्मत किस राजनीतिक नेता में? गांधी जी कह पाए क्या? जवाहरलाल जी कह पाए क्या? पटेल कह पाए क्या? औरत का क्या स्थान होना चाहिए? आपने रमा मित्रा का बता दिया, वो किताब मैंने छापी में आपको भिजवाऊंगा। रमा मित्रा लोहिया के बीच में लेटर्स एक्सचेंज हुए, वो रमा मित्रा ने खुद छापी, वो मिल गई तो गोपाल सिंह जी ने मेरे को भेज दी, तो मैंने उसको रीप्रिंट किया है। ये ऐसा प्रगतिवाद है या नहीं, इतना आधुनिकतावाद है कि भारत का एक बड़ा नेता अपनी एक महिला मित्र के साथ खुलेआम रह रहा है और कुछ नहीं छुपा रहा है। माफ करिए, ये जवाहरलाल जी नहीं कर पाए थे। ऐसा नहीं कि था नहीं, कर नहीं पाए थे, हिम्मत नहीं थी। ये हिम्मत होनी चाहिए, ये हिम्मत उसमें होगी जो एकदम पवित्र व्यक्तित्व होगा। लोहिया उन्हीं पवित्र व्यक्तित्वों में से एक थे। आपको जाना इसलिए मैं जल्दी खत्म करता हूँ। ये सही है कि लोहिया लड़ाकू थे, ये बिल्कुल सही है, और ये भी सही है कि वो अपने सिद्धांतों को कई बार इस हद तक लागू कर देते थे कि साथ के चलने वाले बेचैन हो जाते थे और लगता था कि इनका साथ छोड़ देना चाहिए। राजनारायण लोकसभा का चुनाव हार गए, राज्यसभा में आ गए। राजनारायण उनके घर के आगे 5 दिन बैठे रहे, नहीं मिले उनसे। नहीं, राज्यसभा में क्यों आए? जो हारा हुआ आदमी है लोकसभा में, रिजेक्टेड आदमी, वो आप दूसरे दरवाजे से कैसे आ जाओगे? चोर दरवाजे से। खुद तो कभी नहीं आए राज्यसभा से। आज कितना आम है कि लोग लोकसभा में हारते हैं, अगले दिन ही उनका ही चेला, अब हमारे भी वो बड़े एग्रेस थे, जिस दिन लोकसभा में हारते थे शरद यादव 7 दिन बाद राज्यसभा में आ गए। लालू यादव, मुलायम सिंह यादव, ये किसी भी, ये इन्होंने शुरुआत बहुत अच्छी की थी। मतलब अगर आप देखेंगे लालू यादव और मुलायम सिंह को अगर आप ठीक कंटेक्स्ट में, पर्सपेक्टिव में देखेंगे तो शुरुआत बहुत अच्छी थी। पूरा हिंदी बेल्ट का जो गरीब आदमी है, किसान है, पिछड़ा है, वो एकदम जग गया था और जग करके तैयार हो गया था। उसको फर्क नहीं, उसकी उसमें हिम्मत आ गई थी। बिहार में कोई यादव जो किसान है, इसके पास पैसा भी था, वो भूमिहार और ब्राह्मण के सामने बैठने की हिम्मत नहीं कर सकता था काट पर। यादव, मैं बाकियों की बात नहीं कर रहा हूँ, कोयरी कुर्मी की बात नहीं कर रहा हूँ जो बहुत पिछड़े हैं, मैं पासवान की बात नहीं कर रहा हूँ, मैं मांझी की बात नहीं कर रहा हूँ। ये जो एक अब ओबीसी में भी अपर लेवल पे थे, उनकी भी हिम्मत नहीं थी। वही हाल यूपी में था। इन्होंने शुरुआत बहुत अच्छी की, लेकिन परिवारवाद में सारा आंदोलन इन्होंने नष्ट कर दिया, सारा आंदोलन। आज अगर हम लोग जैसे सुनते रहते हैं कि भाई मोदी के तो परिवार ही नहीं है, क्या ले जाए, किसके लिए करेगा, योगी के तो परिवार ही नहीं है, ये जो कहने की आज स्थिति आई है, ये असल में हमारे जो सोशलिस्ट लोहिया जी के जो चेले थे, उनके कुकर्मों की वजह से आई है। अगर वो सब ठीक रहते तो बड़ा अच्छा रहता। मैं रघु कुमार जी को बहुत बहुत साधुवाद देता हूँ, और मैं जैसा मैंने शुरू में कहा कि बहुत दिनों बाद एक ऐसी किताब आई जिसने ठीक से पढ़ा, समझा, लिखा और क्रिटिक किया। 4 चीज़ें उन्होंने बहुत अच्छी की। इसलिए मैं कोशिश करूँगा कभी इसका हिंदी में अनुवाद हो, क्योंकि इन लोगों को हमारे, मैं लोहिया जी का जैसे कहा ना, जो किताबों को रीपब्लिश कर रहे हैं फिर से, तो काफ़ी लोगों को देते हैं, पढ़ते हैं। लोहिया अगर सत्ता में नहीं थे, अपोजिशन में थे, तो उनकी कोई कदर। आज गोदी मीडिया, वह सब आज की नहीं है गोदी मीडिया। गोदी मीडिया 1947 में पैदा हो गई थी। आपने तो नेहरू जी का सारा पढ़ रखा है। उस समय क्या अपोजिशन लीडर 2 इंच 3 इंच अखबार, टीवी तो तब था नहीं, सारा भरा रहता था प्राइम मिनिस्टर्स, मिनिस्टर्स का, चीफ मिनिस्टर्स का, लेकिन अपोजिशन लीडर्स का 2 इंच 3 इंच 4 इंच। गोदी मीडिया तब भी थी, वो दूसरी गोदी मीडिया थी। आज उससे कहीं ज्यादा बदतर हालत में ये बनी है, लेकिन हम अभी तक कोई भी राजनीतिक बढ़िया विकल्प देने की तैयारी नहीं कर रहे हैं। कल जैसे कांग्रेस ने फैसला किया, इतना शर्मनाक फैसला है लोकतंत्र के लिए कि कांग्रेस वर्किंग कमेटी का चुनाव नहीं होगा, नॉमिनेट की जाएगी। मतलब इस देश में लोकतंत्र अब नहीं रहेगा। अगर पार्टियों में नहीं रहेगा तो देश रहेगा, और पार्टियों में लोकतंत्र की शुरुआत करनी पड़ेगी, पार्टियों में सुचिता करनी पड़ेगी, पार्टियों में हमें औरतों को रिजर्वेशन देना पड़ेगा। ये 33% अटका हुआ है ना, राज्यसभा से पास होकर लोकसभा में नहीं आ रहा है। हमें पार्टियों में भी रिजर्वेशन देना पड़ेगा, उसके बगैर चारा नहीं है। ये मत कहिए कि मेरिट मेरिट, आपने कई हजार साल तक मेरिट की ऐसी तैसी की है, कई हजार साल तक। अगर 100 साल अगर मेरिट क्या होता है, आप मौका दीजिए ना पहले। और ये शुरुआत जो हुई है SC ST की हुई, उसके बाद OBC की हुई। इसको अगर हम ग्राउंड पर जाके, देहात में जाके, उन मोहल्लों में जाके जहाँ गरीब आदमी रह रहा, आप देखेंगे तो पाएंगे कि इस देश में भी बहुत बड़ा परिवर्तन सामाजिक रूप से हुआ है, जिसका श्रेय सिर्फ लोहिया को है, नेहरू जी को नहीं है, गांधी जी को भी नहीं है। गांधी जी ने आजादी दिलाई और वो सर्वमान्य नेता थे। लोहिया बचपन से गांधी जी के पांव छू रहे थे, और जब बड़े हो गए तब हर चिट्ठी में आप देखेंगे गांधी जी को लिखी हर चिट्ठी में आखिरी लाइन लिखी रहती थी, मैं आपके पांव छूता हूं। तो उनका असर था लोहिया पर, गांधी जी का बहुत बड़ा भारी असर था। और उन्होंने, वो खुद अपने आप को कहते थे कि मैं कुजात गांधीवादी हूँ, आउटकास्ट गांधीवादी हूँ। मुझे कोई गांधीवादी नहीं मानता, लेकिन मैं कुजात हूँ। और फिर 2 तरह की और कैटेगरी बताई, सरकारी और मठी, जिन्होंने मठ बना लिए हैं, बड़े बड़े आश्रम खोल लिए हैं, सरकारों से ग्रांट मिलता है। और सरकारी जो हमेशा सरकार की तारीफ करें, जैसे कि जब आपातकाल लग गया तब उसको अनुशासन पर्व कहा, ये सरकारी गांधीवादी की पहचान थी। एक सरकारी गांधीवादी बोलेगा अनुशासन पर्व, डेमोक्रेसी सस्पेंड कर दी गई है, सेंसरशिप है, यह हमारे फंडामेंटल राइट्स नहीं है। और कोई गांधीवादी जो हमेशा लड़ता रहा इन चीजों के लिए, कोई गांधीवादी अगर ये कहे कि अनुशासन पर्व है तो वो सरकारी मैं तो उसको और भी ज्यादा कुछ कह सकता हूँ, लेकिन आप लोग बैठे हैं, आपका फिर से सबका बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद।
धन्यवाद रमाशंकर जी। अभी अध्यक्ष की अनुमति जिसे को सूचनाएं मैं देना चाहता हूँ। सभा के बाद बाहर सबके लिए जलपान की व्यवस्था है। सभी साथियों से मैं रिक्वेस्ट करता हूँ कि सभा के बाद वो जलपान करके जाए। और अभी हमारे रमाशंकर जी का स्वागत हमारे नौजवान साथी घनश्याम यादव और दत्तू, हमारे सुरमौली जी के पुत्र पुराने नेता, उनके पुत्र दत्तू और घनश्याम यादव रमाशंकर जी को
हो गया एक बार।
नहीं, हमारा ऑफिशियल है, वो अनऑफिशियल। मेरा रमाशंकर जी से अनुरोध है कि लोहिया साहित्य के प्रकाशन का काम वो शुरू किए हैं, उसको इसी तरह आगे करते रहे। हम सबका सहयोग उनके साथ रहेगा। उनके पास वो साधन है, साधन संपन्न है, तो मैं चाहता हूँ कि हर साल 2-4 किताबें हिंदी में अंग्रेजी में वो निकालते रहें और उसमें जो भी सहयोग होगा हम लोग हैदराबाद के साथी उनके साथ रहेंगे। अभी हमारे हैदराबाद के पुनर्निर्माण संगम के लोग एक पुस्तक देना चाहते हैं गोवा जी को। 2 मिनट में जल्दी आइए। नहीं, पुस्तक लीजिए, खाली पुस्तक, भाषण नहीं। हमारे एक समाजवादी नेता सुरमौली जी थे, वो इसको स्टैब्लिश किए थे।
ना కొంచెం వెనక్కి
थैंक यू। एक रिविजिटिंग डॉक्टर लोहिया, वो बाहर कुछ कॉपीज उपलब्ध है, वो आप लोग का खरीदना चाहे तो खरीद सकते हैं। बहुत ही कम कॉपीज है उसके, पब्लिशर ने वो कम कॉपीज हमको दिए हैं, वो बाहर उपलब्ध है। जो भी साथी खरीदना चाहते हैं खरीद सकते हैं। मैं अभी हमारे अध्यक्ष जी की अनुमति जी से और मुख्य अतिथि जी की अनुमति जी से मैं उनसे अनुरोध करता हूं कि हमारे रघु कुमार जी का स्वागत, ये वटे शोभनाथेश्वर राव जी है, बहुत पुराने जनता पार्टी के टाइम पे एमपी थे और अनुरोध है कि आप सब लोग उनका स्वागत। You should continue this writing.
Yeah, I'm planning another book.
So very good, very good.
That's pre-Marxist.
Non-Marxist.
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 मैं श्री ए नारायण जी से निवेदन करूंगा कि वो वोट ऑफ थैंक्स प्रपोज
సంతాన్యాస్ ఏర్పాటు చేసిన సమావేశానికి చేసిన పెద్దలండి ఖర్జీ రామశంకర్ సంగీత్ జీ రామచంద్రమూర్తి గారికి మరియు ఈ సమావేశానికి వచ్చిన పెద్దలందరికీ విద్యార్థులకు మేధావులకు అందరికీ కూడా ధన్యవాదాలు తెలుపుతూ ఈ సమావేశాన్ని
Shankar Nikam but Kevapan was the follower continues continued. So because you have the
Justice Raman Rao, High Court Judge, retired High Court Judge, and the founder of
I have all the 3 books of Gandhi. I have all the 3 books of Gandhi. Thank you.
ఇక్కడ सर ఇక్కడ చూడండి
जातिवाद के खिलाफ उनकी लड़ाई के बारे में जातिवाद की लड़ाई रहे हैं उनका मुझे याद है उनका ये कहना था कि जब तक जातिवाद और डिस्क्रिमिनेशन अगेंस्ट वुमेन खत्म नहीं होता इंडिया का पावर
कहाँ ले गए उधर जाइए आप जरा ये लो